What do we got? Are we on?
Yep.
Okay. Do I have everybody who's Senator Benson, Senator Elfreth? We're getting there. Anybody else want to come up to the table? If you want to talk, you can come up and sit in one of the seats. It's up to you. You don't have to. I know Pika wants to talk.
I don't have. Did she get one for them?
Okay, thank you all for joining us. Doing a little work group here. We've invited people who came and testified on what's the bill number?
784.
784. And this is legislation that would tax ammunition and guns in an effort to raise money for, I guess, a number of things, but primarily for shock trauma and the trauma related components. If you want to just quickly go through the bill.
There we go. All right. So the bill you have in the 784, the bill in front of you, this would create a new gross receipts tax on firearm dealers. And the tax would apply to the gross receipts from the sale of firearms, ammunition, and firearm accessories. Those are all currently defined terms within the code. So there's cross references back to the code sections. The revenue that it would generate would then flow through. It's on page 4 and 5 is the distribution of where the revenue would go that comes in from the gross receipts tax. The rest of the bill is the beginning on page 5 is the definition section, how a firearm accessory is defined, who the tax applies to. It's the receipts by a federally licensed firearm dealer. And then there is an exemption for receipts that are attributable to firearms, accessories, and ammunition that's sold to a law enforcement agency, an armed forces of the United States, or the National Guard. So those receipts by that dealer would be exempt from the tax. And then really from page 7 on is just language that's necessary because we're creating a new tax. So you've got to address tax returns, tax filings, and fit them into the whole tax code, because this is a new type of tax that's being imposed here.
Okay. So I'm going to ask some of our guests to give their quick problem. Let's just start with just there's a number, there are components beyond the tax itself, but just on the tax, what issues that you may have, and if you have any solutions, knowing that I think the committee is pretty interested in doing something with this ultimately. So, gentlemen, yep. Whoever wants to start.
Is that okay? So I'm not here to debate the bill. It's my sense that the bill is going to be viewed favorably by the committee. And if it's done in a certain way, then I represent National Shooting Sports Foundation. It's all the manufacturers in state, or Benelli, Beretta, and Stoger, and all the retailers and dealers. So the bill does not differentiate among the 11 different types of dealers. I have a list of these dealers here. If anybody cares to look at them, there are 11 different types of dealers. The bill, my amendments specify that the bill will comply with the same spirit and intent and letter of the California law. So here I've got a copy of the California statute, which applies the excise tax to the retail sale. There on page 5 and 7, if you take a look at the definition of on 7 of the taxes imposed on the sale, that should be the retail sale. And then if you look on page 5, retail, yeah, the excise tax on the retail sale of the firearm, not the retail sales tax. Now, I have amendments here if you'd like to see them. I've shared the amendments. What's that?
Yes.
Well, no, this bill imposes an excise tax. No, I'm not arguing with this excise tax. That's a policy issue that the committee is going to decide. If it's 11 or if it's less than 11, that's up to you. I'm not here to say I like 5 instead of 7 or 11. That's up to the committee. I've shared these with the sponsor. So I'm saying there is a retail sales tax, but the excise tax should be imposed at the point of sale. And I'll tell you why I say that is because, our testimony was that the law-abiding citizens who pass background checks are not the ones committing these horrible acts of murders and shootings. However, there was credible testimony that a lot of weapons, that firearms that are used in these shootings are stolen or are lost and then found by someone who commits a crime. So the sale should be on the person who buys the firearm, the tax, because they should be the ones who safeguard that from being lost or stolen. So I've got copies of the California statute, of the California's definition of gross receipts. I have amendments. So the important part of this is if that language on page 7 is not cured, this law could be construed to apply from a tax from the manufacturer to a distributor to retailer. I don't think that's the intent of the bill. These amendments would clarify that it's on the retail sale. So there'd be a retail sales tax and there'd be an excise tax, whatever amount the committee prefers. Oh, Mr. Chairman, one last thing. This amendment also states that it would be imposed on a type 1 firearm dealer, a type 1 gunsmith, and a type 1 pawnbroker. There are 11 different types of FFLs. Those 3 that I just mentioned, type 01 and type 02, are the ones that sell at retail. And it imposes it. That's in the definition of on page 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Pennock, I'm the president of Maryland Shell Issue. I represent, both in my personal capacity and as president of Maryland Shell Issue, a number of gun retailers. These are type 1 retail dealers. So I have a few points to make, and let me start with the least important. The bill taxes FFLs and only FFLs for firearms sales, ammunition sales, and accessory sales. But ammunition sales and accessory sales can be made by anyone. They're not regulated. So what this bill will essentially do is drive all those sales to non-regulated entities. Now, ammunition sales and accessory sales are lifeblood of retail dealers' scopes. And I'll give you an example. I recently purchased a scope that costs over $2,000. I'm not going to purchase it from a FFL. I'm going to purchase it from Amazon or another dealer that is not an FFL, because it will save me $220. So what you're doing is you're taxing sales by an FFL on merchandise that FFL does not uniquely sell. It only sells firearms, and those are the regulated entities, that items that are uniquely applicable to FFLs. So at a minimum, the bill's got to recognize the reality, the economic reality associated with that. Second, this will drive dealers out of business. Make no mistake about it, the dealer's margin on a sale of a firearm is less than 11% on average. So they have a choice. They can either eat it and go out of business that way, or they can not eat it and pass it on, and then they're going to be in competition with dealers outside this state's jurisdiction. There's nothing in federal or state law that precludes an individual resident of Maryland from going across state lines and purchasing firearms. So this threatens their survival. And 3, and not least, is there are massive constitutional problems, and it's detailed in my written testimony on this bill, with singling out the exercise of a constitutional right. In the First Amendment context, the Supreme Court has already held in a case called Minneapolis Star that a tax on ink and paper singled out the press, and that was unconstitutional regardless of the motivation of the legislature and regardless of how much of an impact it was, because it was so much of a threat to the survival of the press that it was per se unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court has held in multiple times that the Second Amendment is not to be treated any different from any other of the Bill of Rights. And the most common analogy to it is the First Amendment, because both bills, both First Amendment and the Second Amendment, address the rights of the people. So there's no doubt that the people have a right to acquire firearms and ammunition for that matter. So the right is going to be heavily taxed, the exercise is by the virtue of this, and it will drive dealers out of business or force them to go across state lines. Now, a number of these dealers already exist on the borders of Maryland. They could just move their businesses across state lines and they will continue to thrive, and they could sell to Maryland residents and they don't need to be here. So there's no earthly reason, as we see it, that you're going to basically penalize local dealers who are not responsible for the trauma center's use. As I understand it, the trauma centers, just in firearms alone, it's like 7% of the caseload. And that's from the illegal use overwhelmingly of firearms. Persons actually exercising this right to purchase from FFLs are immediately background checked, and they are lawful owners and lawful users of firearms. They are the people who are not the cause of the use of trauma centers.
Okay, well, we're not going to get into that debate right now.
Okay, so
So on the tax, are there any more comments about that itself? And as a sales tax, let me ask that, as a sales tax, does that change things from your perspective at all?
it makes it clearer. I'm a great fan of clarity in legislation. And as it was, Mr. Has a point here. Mr. Pickett has a point that right now, as it read, it could be taxed, be levied on 3 levels of distribution at least. So if you make it applicable to the sales tax, it won't affect the manufacturers so much as it will affect the dealers, the retail dealers themselves. So the tax will have that effect, and it will be focused solely on the dealers.
Mr. Chairman,
So
so it's clear, the amendment I'm going to submit, if you look at page 7, lines 2 through 5, it says the excise tax is imposed on the retail sale in addition to a sales tax.
no, I understand.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. Well, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I represent Beretta, which is Maryland homegrown manufacturer. Beretta US has its facilities in Accokeek, Maryland, as I testified to a couple of weeks ago. From our point of view, the concern is the loss of those manufacturing jobs. There's also a facility that Senator John Pica represents in Pocomoke. That's about 40 family sustaining jobs. The facility.
So no, I appreciate all that, but again, to the point of the tax, I presume then that you would agree that a sales tax is more acceptable.
We believe the greatest threat, Beretta believes the greatest threat is driving out manufacturing out of the state of Maryland. So a point of sales tax would be the least deleterious, the most favorable.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, can I just say that there will be a sales tax?
I'm aware of how it
Okay.
works. I get it.
Okay.
Yeah. Up from the side, yeah.
I just wanted to address 2 points that were made by one of the earlier speakers. The amendments that we've submitted to the sponsors would address the issue of only FFLs being subject to the tax as moving it toward a sales tax. And apologies. My name is Justin Hayes. I'm the Director of State Affairs for the Comptroller's Office. We're not taking a position on the merits of the bill, just operational issues as we see it from the tax collector. And our amendments address that issue about only FFLs being subjected to the tax. And secondly, I wanted to come back to a point that was made earlier, that out-of-state dealers with sufficient nexus to Maryland will be subject to the sales and use tax under the provisions of the Wynn decision, as the Supreme Court indicated. So
And Jeff, that's sales tax. You know.
that is sales tax in this case,
Okay.
yes.
And this bill doesn't change that. This is an excise tax on top of the sales tax. Okay,
You're right.
okay.
So for the purposes of an enhanced sales tax on firearms and ammunition, out-of-state dealers would be subject to that sales and use tax should they have a sufficient nexus to Maryland, which the vast majority of those website dealers and other things do have under the law.
So you're talking about the Wayfair decision that came out?
Wayfair, excuse me, not Wynn.
Okay, so I'm familiar with Wayfair. Actually helped litigate that when I was Department of Justice. So there still has to be a connection of taxes. So it's going to be difficult for you to have that nexus for dealers who sell to only in their local stores. That don't actually ship any product into Maryland itself. So what you have with under Wayfair is they were shipping products into like Amazon into Maryland and making sales in Maryland. And that was sufficient nexus to justify the tax. The dealers are not doing that. They're actually doing a sale over the counter in a foreign jurisdiction. And they're not availing themselves of the jurisdiction of Maryland at all.
If I may, that's true of the sale of all tangible personal property outside of the state. Anybody could go to Delaware and buy something free of sales tax.
That's true. And so what you have is a use tax that's leveled on the individual users who's supposed to pay it when they bring it back into Maryland. Of course, good luck collecting that, right? So you don't collect that, as the reality is. So you can levy the use tax on the people who buy outside the state, but you're not going to be able to level the tax on the dealer himself, because there's no nexus there on sales and taking place entirely outside the state of Maryland, even under Wayfair.
Do any members have questions at this point? Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit onto the public safety purchases. And so in the bill, how was that set up?
So in the bill on page 7, there is an exemption that says that the receipts from a firearm accessory or ammunition, the receipts are not subject to the tax if the receipts are attributable to a law enforcement agency, the armed forces of the United States, or the National Guard.
You just anyone say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Matt. So in negotiations with some of the stakeholders, including the FOP, it comes out our understanding that a lot of law enforcement officers are personally purchasing ammunition for training purposes because their local law enforcement departments are not. And so I think I would like to propose to the work group that we carve out an exemption for ammunition for law enforcement officers, and working with the comptroller's office. The kind of simplest way to do that is just when someone presents a law enforcement badge, because if they're lying about that, they have bigger problems than trying to get a small tax discount.
Senator Jennings?
So, I support that, but I look at, you're talking about making sure they're buying it in use of their public service capacity. So, you know, if an officer goes in, he's buying shotgun shells for deer season, you're not looking for that. Because I mean, that's what I deal with on my farm. So for instance, if it's non-breeding animals, I don't get tax exempt. If it's breeding, I do, and I have to make that decision at the time of purchase. But they also they buy more than just ammunition. They do buy accessories and stuff through galls and other catalogs that they're going to carry on them, that I would make sure whatever's in here to be taxed, if they're using it as a police officer for either training or in their professional capacity, exempt them, but not.
Thank you. I think some of it's gonna have to be on the honor system, to your point about whether it's ammunition for shoot. Yeah, I think it's gonna get too difficult, especially for the folks small business owners, and for the comptroller's office to parse that out. It's gonna have to be on the honor system.
It is, but I think should this pass,
Mhm.
to them that, hey, look,
Mhm.
this is only for your professional capacity. Don't buy your Sunday hunting gear
I think it's fair.
under this.
Anticipate that that would work similar to someone with a sales and use tax exemption certificate. You know, you can walk into any store and use your sales and use tax exemption for personal purposes as opposed to your business or your nonprofit. And that's not something that we can police directly, but it would operate that way in this case with a sales and use tax for ammunition.
And if I may, Krista Sermon, Deputy Director of the Legal Division of the Comptroller's Office. 2 points. One is that to Senator Jennings' point, is it, are certain types of ammo used for police training purposes as opposed to other purposes? That might be a way to,
I think
whatever their Delineate.
service weapon is. I get, you know, whatever weapon they use to do their job. I think most of them carry 9mm or 40s. I don't know what they. Yeah. It gets, I think it's to say what he said, it's the honesty of the integrity of the officer that when they're buying it, just like we have those sales and use cards that we can use if we're buying stuff for our office. But, you know, if I'm buying a laptop for my personal use, I shouldn't use it and I won't use it. But if I do, it's, you know, I'm the one that should I get caught.
understood. I also wanted to ask if that type of a provision is included in the ultimate bill. Those officers are currently, as and please correct me if I'm wrong, paying sales and use tax as just part of the sale of tangible personal property. So we would like it to be clear whether they are only exempt from the additional sales and use tax above 6%, or whether they're now getting a blanket sales and use tax exemption on all ammo. It would be helpful to have that, whichever way it goes, clear in the statute. If it's in statute, it would get programmed into their point of sale.
Okay. Something, thank you.
Okay. Other issues that we had out, Senator, were there things that, Senator Alfred, did you have other issues that within the bill that we haven't, anybody else on the committee? And anybody? Okay. Any further questions from the committee? Do we think we have enough information then? Because we'll be taking this into a voting session probably tomorrow at some point. Everybody feels comfortable that they have what the information they need. Okay. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your participation. What's that?
For a living, so you can expect that the bill will be.
Sir, you can do whatever you feel you need to do.
I know, I would, it's just a point of warning.
Thank you for participating. Thank you.